It's a pleasure and honor, and we are very grateful that you shared some of your time, which we know that is very scarce, coming from the 61st IPCC session here in Sofia. I'm representing the Ecological Manifesto of Connect Foundation, and we are working on climate change, raising awareness and education and literacy. So, as me personally, I'm following the process of COP since 2019 more seriously. I'm wondering, following the whole timeline of the process after the Paris Agreement, which were one of the most serious achievements after the agreement, what has changed and since 2019 and now, because we are more active in this time frame, what happened and what now is the focus of the IPCC.
Yes, so first of all, I think the Paris Agreement by itself is an achievement because it has changed completely the way countries will negotiate and will go together towards this goal of reducing CO2 emissions. And the Paris Agreement also has a goal of reaching well below 2 degrees of global warming and pursuing towards 1.5 degrees if possible. And so the question is, what are the progresses now? I think if we can say it in a very simple way, the worst scenario is not on the way at the moment. So there has been policies by several countries which will help to avoid the worst case scenario in terms of global warming for the end of the century. However, we are not on track for the 1.5 degrees at the moment. So we have to also recognize that we have what we call an emission gap. That is to say, the reduction of emission CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions is too slow, way too slow. So to reach the 1.5 degrees, that will be extremely difficult. We will probably exceed the 1.5 degree by the middle of the century and even maybe in 10 years or so. And the question is whether we will have curbed the emissions sufficiently by then to be able to come back to 1.5 later. It's very unlikely. However, there is hope that we can still do below 2 degrees to respect the Paris Agreement. So in terms of emissions of greenhouse gases, we have avoided the worst for the moment, but we have not reached the trajectory to be on track for the 1.5 and the Paris Agreement. But there are other things which are important in the Paris Agreement, which are the adaptation goals and the losses and damages question, for which there has been progresses, which are that now we have a system, a fund that would allow money transfer for reconstruction and for damages and losses. So that's very important. It's in place. There's not enough money in it at the moment, way not enough. But there is still this mechanism which is in place. It was put in place at the COP 28 in Dubai. And there are also interesting progresses on adaptation, although it's also too slow, because adaptation is not just one number, the CO2 emissions. it's different in different places in the world. So it's very difficult to manage globally because it's not uniform. So adaptation is also in the Paris Agreement and it's progressing. And there are some reports of progresses in adaptation. Countries should have, for instance, adaptation plans, and this is what is happening. There's also prevention for heat and early warning systems, and there are many adaptation ways of preventing damaging events. Many countries have now plans, but some countries do not have plans and are quite exposed to huge impacts.
Unfortunately, we see a lot of weather extremes. Are we ready? Still learning how to adapt.
We are. I used to say we are not ready because we usually adapt to what we just saw, just witnessed. So if we have a huge heat wave with many people dying, maybe after there will be a policy which would be suitable for that heat wave, but not for the next one, which will be harder.
And if I may say it like this, can we give a word also to nature, and if you can elaborate a little bit on the ecosystems and what problems we can see and which are the most threatening ones, that also are we reaching peaks that we don't have to reach and go over?
Yes, unfortunately the answer is yes. We have a huge loss of biodiversity, which is due to climate change, but also due to other factors like the use of land and the way we manage land and agriculture. There's a huge loss of biodiversity currently, and this is a problem because biodiversity is at the source of food and many things. So we have to realize that even though we do not really see the loss of biodiversity because we often live in cities or in settlements and it's sometimes a bit far away, this loss of biodiversity is going to be a very hard problem later. So that's one thing, and the other thing is if we look at forests, for instance, the impacts of climate change is to produce a situation where we have higher risks of forest burning, wildfires, and the forests are also helping us with the CO2. And if we lose the forests, that will increase the CO2 accumulation in the atmosphere. So forests are giving services, the ocean is giving services, mountains are giving services, especially for the water, for water availability. We have billions of people depending on the water, which is on the Himalayas, for instance, on the glaciers. And when all those glaciers are melting, this will put a lot, billions of people at risk. Because they heavily depend on this water resources. But if we look closer to us in the mountains in Europe, it's also a resource. I mean, the glaciers and maybe not in Bulgaria, but in other parts of Europe, like Central Europe or Western Europe, glaciers are providing the water for the rivers, which are providing the cooling system for the power plants, or the agriculture, or many services. So we are modifying and perturbing all these systems with climate change.
But are most of the officials and the people that are decision makers are informed well enough of the situation and the seriousness of the problem, and will they be ready to act if something is in danger? That's another question.
Yeah, this is a difficult question because you can be aware but not necessarily understand deeply the problem. So if we do not understand, if we do not deeply understand the problem, it's more difficult to act because you cannot be fully convinced that is the problem. So that is why scientists are giving a lot of their time to explain and to try to explain, but at a certain point science is difficult to explain because it needs some scientific background.
I will ask you on this as well. Yeah.
And so at a certain point we have to simplify, and the citizen also have to have trust in science.
And scientists, you work with data. Do you have enough data to monitor all ecosystems?
It depends where. In Europe in general we have enough data, but there are many parts of the world where we do not have enough data for monitoring even simple things such as temperature and precipitation. Some parts of the world. Now with satellite and remote sensing, we have a better global view, but it's still up to parts of the world.
When you talk about climate change, you mostly mean carbon emissions. That's one of the biggest threats. But also, don't we forget temperature rising, and also we saw during COVID such kind of period where we had reduction of carbon emissions, but also in the same time temperature continued to raise, and we forgot about this problem, which still is the core of the change that is happening.
Yeah, the temperature are going to increase as long as the emissions increase. As long as the emissions are not zero, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So the temperatures will stabilize only when the emissions, the net emissions will be zero. That is to say, sources minus sinks will be zero. So that's the carbon dioxide taken from fossil reserves put into the atmosphere will stay for a very long time. It will not necessarily stay in the atmosphere. It will go in the trees, in the ocean, come back to the atmosphere, but will stay in the surface of the Earth while it was well below. So the only solution is to, if we want to stabilize the climate, is to have a net zero emission, what we call net zero emission. And if we want to go back to lower temperatures, then we have to take the CO2 and put it in and capture it. That's a different story.
Yeah. And now you're here in Sofia for the 61st session of IPCC. Can you tell us which is the most interesting or important topic that you're discussing now? And also we spoke previously about communication and how scientific knowledge is spread to wider public, and also in this regard, can we work more on the civil sector, do something to assist you, the scientists, and the knowledge that you have to reach more and more people?
Yes, so we are here at the plenary, so we are meeting with the governments in Bulgaria. So we have all the governments represented here, and all the bureau members, the elected members, scientists are present also. And we have a heavy agenda. It's loaded. And the first thing, I think, very important is to make sure we all agree on the outline of the special report on climate change in cities. That's our first very important goal for this meeting. I'm optimistic on that one. The second goal is to agree also on the outline So it's not the report, it's just the outline which describes the content. It's to agree on the outline of a methodological report on what we call short-lived climate forces. So these are not CO2 or nitrogen peroxide, but these, or nitrous oxide, sorry, these are compounds like nitrogen oxides or methane or other organic compounds and stuff like that, which are often difficult to inventory in their emissions. And the IPCC is providing a framework and guidelines to the countries how to count those emissions, so they can count emissions in a kind of standard way. Mm-hmm. So this is very important because if you don't have these standards, the emissions will be counted differently in different countries. So for these compounds, which are very important, I mean, methane is a very important gas in greenhouse gas. So that's the second objective. There are other objectives, like also discussing the schedule of the reports. Mm-hmm. So we will discuss with the governments when we will, the scheduling of our reports, especially the assessment reports. So that will be part of the next week's discussion.
I see. And lastly, on communication and what the civil sector can do to assist your work, do you have any recommendations or needs that has to be fulfilled?
Yes, so communication. So scientists have to progress on communication. They are doing a lot of communication, but that's not their first skill. I mean, so we have to progress on that, and we have to work with journalists, we have to work with specialists to put complex things into simple words that can be that can make understand the core of the issues and not all the details. The core. So that's very important. And also, so that's on our side, but also I think the civil society can relate, and there are many initiatives at the moment. I can mention just the climate fresque, for instance.
Thank you for mentioning.
Yeah. The climate fresque is one very popular initiative where civil society can not only just listen, but also participate and propagate. It's a game. It's a very nice workshop game, type of serious game, and I saw many people coming out of these sessions and saying, "Wow, I learned. I'm just discovering something that I would never imagine."
Actually, yes, it's a wonderful tool.
Yeah.
Thanks to Cedric Rigan for the initiative.
Yeah.
Also in Bulgaria, we are very active in
there are others also. There are other tools.
Yeah, this one's the main one. Thank you very much for the time and the conversation that we had.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy it.